Hey everybody, and happy Friday. In today's episode of RPG Horror Story Cringe, we have a tale about a player that can't separate fantasy from reality. A story about a player that doesn't want any reality in his fantasy, and much more. But before we get into those, here is Simba with some A Simba R. Like, comment, and subscribe. Thanks, Simba. Now let's get right into these stories. Player has a meltdown over husband killing himself in Delta Green. By Reddit user DG Meltdown. This happened over the past weekend. I am a GM that ran a Delta Green one-shot for a few friends for the Halloween weekend. For context, Delta Green is a modern spin on the Call of Cthulhu system. Players take the role of agents in a clandestine government conspiracy to investigate and contain unnatural or paranormal events. The two main characters of this story are a married couple. I'll call the husband Tex and his wife Anne. Names are changed for anonymity, yada yada. The module we played was a haunted house investigation that I thought was perfect for Halloween. Music from a darkened room for those interested. I had played a lot of tabletop RPGs with everyone at the table previously, and we generally meshed well. However, Anne has a persistent issue of modeling her in-game characters off of herself and life. With a modern setting of Delta Green, she practically plugged herself into the game. This is normally not an issue in my opinion, but Anne is the type to take it personally if anything happens to her in-game representation of herself. One particular aspect of Anne's self-insert manifested in the Delta Green bond system. Bonds, without getting heavily into game mechanics, are in-game players' close friends and family, used as sanity buffers. Anne had based all of her bonds off of real-life analogs, among which was her husband, aka Tex in real life. You can probably see where this is going. The night had been going swell for a few hours. Everyone at the table seemed to be having a good time. Though I had observed that Anne was looking a little uncomfortable with the graphic descriptions within the module. I had given several content warnings before we started and continually asked, but she had assured me that she was doing well as the night progressed. The night came to a head where I utilized the mechanic of the haunted house to essentially lure a bond to it in order to bait an agent to go to the house alone, and I had chosen Anne's husband to be the victim of the lure. In-game, the agents are resting at a local motel near the haunted house for the night when Anne receives a call from her husband telling her that he was in the house. In a hurry, Anne takes one of the agent's two cars and hauls ass to the house in order to rescue her husband. The group had noticed Anne peeling away from the motel and promptly followed in the remaining vehicle to the house. Tex is first in and burst through the entrance to see Anne struggling with an obviously possessed husband in unarmed combat, and Tex jumps in to wrest the husband off of Anne. Tex then follows up by saying, "I would like to push him away from us, unholster my revolver, and fan fire it into this deranged man." Before I could get a word in, Anne exploded. She screamed out, "That's you! Why are you killing yourself? What is wrong with you? You don't have to shoot him!" And then proceeds to break down out of game and starts crying at the table. The mood was all over the place. Initially, a couple of us laughed at Tex's insane actions, but it went a full 180 in a span of a few seconds. A couple girls rushed to calm Anne, and Tex attempted to placate her by running the usual gamut of "it's a game" excuses, but Anne lamented that her husband was now dead, and that she felt completely betrayed by Tex. I agreed that Tex's actions were excessive and offered to retcon that portion. I really did not intend for anyone to murder the husband, and the possession would have been easily removed had they simply tried. But the damage was done, and Anne was no longer in a mood to play. So the group settled to watch horror films for the remainder of the night, but that led to another flare-up as Anne proclaimed that she was done with horror for the year. I stuck around for maybe a half an hour after that, then took my leave as it had gotten pretty awkward after the tantrums. In hindsight, I should have not made Anne's bond the target of the house, but Anne was chosen through a series of roles. If I had not done anything to her, then that would have been no better than favoritism in my opinion. Plus, everyone played the game knowing full well that this was make-believe. I guess some people just cannot separate fact from the theater of the mind. Yeah, I don't think OP should feel bad at all. Anne was the one that couldn't separate reality from fantasy, and took everything way too seriously. And I agree with OP that purposefully not choosing her bond as the target of the house would have been kind of like playing favorites. I can almost feel the secondhand embarrassment of Tex dealing with his wife being in hysterics, and basically ruining the night for everyone involved. I can't imagine how awkward that must have been. Let's move on. Your NPCs are ruining my fantasy experience. By Reddit user Danger Noodle Jorm. I run paid games on Roll20 as a bit of fun for beer money. The vast majority of my players are fantastic people who just couldn't find another DM, or who were tired of groups combusting due to drama or scheduling issues. Some of them, however, are the kind of people who have been kicked from every other table. That guy starts off strong by letting us all know that he has had 8 different groups in the last 2 months, and he just doesn't understand why he's had such bad luck. As we're discussing the lore of the world, and doing the usual Session 0 and character creation stuff, he regales us with the story of his quote-unquote new character, which was just his character from an old game, so he didn't really pay attention to any of the descriptions of locations or the backstory of the world when he chose to play Boring McHalfork the Barbarian. The rest of the party, on the other hand, decided to play a group of bounty hunters. When I'm running a homebrew sandbox setting, I like to let the players choose where they start. Since they were bounty hunters, they chose to start in the post-apocalyptic desert ruin of the Old Kings, basically Pompeii, Atlantis, and Old Vyra mixed together. I'd drawn heavy inspiration from ancient Egypt, Mesopotamia, and the Indus Valley civilization for this area, so naturally, when I was doing the art for the NPCs, I drew on those same inspirations. In other words, many of the NPCs from that area were not white. So the party is looking around town, doing a bit of shopping to gear up for the bounty they've been hired for, when they meet the first named NPC. I pull up the artwork, and that guy literally says, "Ew." I ask him what's wrong, and he brushes it off. The next NPC gets a big sigh, and the third NPC gets treated so rudely that guy's barbarian has made an enemy for life. By the second session, and NPC number 14-ish, he snaps. That guy, "Can you cut the crap already?" Me, "I don't understand. What are you talking about?" That guy, "I'm really tired of this BS. I play D&D to escape the real world. Like, when I imagine fantasy, I don't imagine, you know." At this point, he lowers his voice to a weird, creepy whisper. "Those people. I picture knights and wizards and stuff." Me, "Yeah, but they are knights and wizards and stuff." That guy, "No, I mean real heroes. Like, I just can't picture these NPCs in a proper high fantasy setting like Game of Thrones." Well, there was about 5 more minutes of this guy digging his hole deeper. Apparently, he'd imagined the entirety of Essos as white, still confused by that one. And his entire idea of an immersive fantasy realm was basically the 90s versions of the Arthurian or Viking eras, without any influence from real-world politics. He thought that I was making some kind of woke political point about diversity. After a thorough roasting from every other player at the table, everyone including that guy agreed that this group wasn't the one for him, and I guess he rode off into the sunset to bother another group. So, this player wanted to escape from his horrible reality of people of other races existing around him in the real world, and wanted his fantasy to just be all white people. Yeah, something tells me that this dude didn't like the Rings of Power show just because it had some black actors in it, instead of not liking it for the right reasons, like butchering the lore and bad writing. I'd say that OP's group had a good day when that player left the game, as nothing of value was lost. Let's move on. The Tryhard Bard by Reddit user Cockledoo. This is a horror story about a one-shot I was part of a couple years ago. It was my first time as a player, and I found a group online to run a one-shot with. I was so excited. A week before the game, I sat there for a minute thinking about my first ever D&D character. Someone interesting and likable, but not so cookie-cutter as to betray how new I actually was. I was, and still am, this shy and awkward guy, so naturally, I settled on a Kenku Bard, one of the hardest role-playing characters, and one of the most role-play beginner-unfriendly classes in D&D. The Kenku would be a former pirate, and a crew full of salty sailors. Imagine a pirate captain, a grizzled, battle-hardened, and foul-mouthed buccaneer. Now, imagine the annoying parrot on his shoulder. I wanted to be that parrot, in D&D form. I took Vicious Mockery and a couple other boring, insignificant spells, and sent my sheet to the DM. I spend the day actually writing down insults I would pull out of the drop of a hat every time I used Vicious Mockery. Knee slappers like, "Your breath smells like you floss with pubic hair," or "Your head is so thick that you're immune to psychic damage." Comedy gold. The night of the session came, and I was strapped with these zingers that I was certain would make my character unforgettable. In a way, I was right. Reader, 2 things happened that I still look back and shudder about to this day. 1. I was so tunnel-visioned with all those jokes I had written that I put Vicious Mockery, a dumb little cantrip, at the top of my spell priorities. I sometimes overlooked more important and useful spells in order to throw out a quip. And 2. My jokes absolutely bombed. My comedic timing couldn't have been worse, and in the heat of battle with 4 elementals, nobody, and I mean nobody, wanted to hear some Kenku tell an earth elemental our party was going to kick his D20s so far up his nutsack he'd have to roll a choking con save. Needless to say, it was pretty painful, but the party joked about it later, which made me feel a little better. The group disbanded after the one-shot, and I can't help but think it was because they were afraid I would return with more absolutely amazing jokes. Honestly, I think OP is being way too hard on himself. Some of those jokes were actually pretty good, and if that is the personality that you were going for with that character, I think you did it pretty well. I'm currently playing a bard as well, and also have a text file dedicated to jokes to use with hideous laughter. And I can't wait to make the other players facepalm with my dad jokes. So yeah, OP, I give you the Doge stamp of character approval. Let's move on. That Improv Girl by Reddit user Bubble Rock. Hi everyone. My friend frequents the subreddit and thinks I should share a story of my session that went very wrong. I'm a DM, but not a very experienced one. I have several one-shots and short stories that I wrote myself, which I then adapt for friends who would like to try out playing an RPG session. Recently, I learned about the Fate system and thought it could be a cool framework to use for a thriller horror setting. I wanted to lean into the collaborative storytelling aspect of it, so I had a general idea of what I wanted to do. A rich mogul, a rip-off Mark Zuckerberg, invites his old gang from high school to a little reunion at his mansion, and spooky stuff would ensue. I set up a session 0, where we would all create the characters, come up with their backstory, and how they got to know the mogul character. It already started being challenging at this point, because every person wanted to be a loser loner black sheep with no friends, despite the fact that they had to be high school friends for the setting to work out. We managed to settle on the idea that everyone in this group hung out together because no one else liked them, and the only female character in the group insisted that she wanted to be an ex of the rich mogul. I asked her how she wants their relationship to end, because I will use it as a building block for the story. She said, "It was a high school romance. They drifted apart after graduation." And I happily went with that one. Come the session day, and she's being difficult. One of the first things players had to do upon entering the mansion was signing NDAs, and she insisted that she won't sign it no matter what, which made it pretty impossible to progress with the rest of the session, especially after all the other players happily signed and moved on to another part of the mansion and another part of the roleplay. She didn't want to leave the mansion either, or try out any alternative approach. It took us like 30 minutes until this character finally got over it and signed. We finally moved on to dinner with the host, during which her character pulled quite a stunt. She started insisting that the host was an asshole to her during their relationship and that he cheated on her, which made their breakup very sour. I was stunned since it wasn't what we agreed on, and I started insisting, as a character, that she misunderstood the situation. But she replied with, "You were in her dorm room. I walked in on you." "It wasn't what you think. I was just helping out that other student with her algebra homework," was the response I gave. And then she drops a bombshell. "You helped her with her algebra homework whilst being balls deep in her pussy?" I was stunned. It wasn't what we agreed on, but I decided to roll with the punches. But the rest of the session went similarly, with the character actively going against the script, basically bumping her head against the wall the entire time, and going against the lore we agreed on together. After the session, the friend was very proud of herself, saying, "I think I was very entertaining. It's because I'm so into improv, you know. I wanted to spice up the session." It was spicy, alright. Yeah, that player sounds like she was a handful. It definitely sounded like she was suffering from a form of main character syndrome that I like to call everybody play off of me. It's when a player does outlandish stuff out of the blue and expects the rest of the players to play off it and center the roleplay around them. Especially when you consider that she went off the pre-planned backstory that her and OP agreed upon beforehand. Then there's the fact that she complimented her own roleplay, stating that it made things even better, which in and of itself is a huge red flag. I would say to have a talk with this player about their behavior, but I get the feeling that she would just not take the criticism well, with how proud she felt about herself afterwards. So maybe the best bet is to just not play with this person again. Though, that is just my thinking. What do you all think? And that will do it for today. If you have a story that you would like to be shared, be sure to post it to the D&D Doge subreddit, post a link in the comments, or even at me on Twitter. As always, I appreciate all of you, and may all of your rolls be natural 20s. Until next time.